Greetings, off-season After Dark fans. Glad to have you here for episode 57. And for this episode, we dive into the Blue Raiders, a team I've wanted to talk about for a while. I know many of you who are viewers of me from coming over from Corey's Lockdown Vandy will stay in state and look at MTSU. So it should be a fun episode. I'm glad to have Jake here who does Blue Raider Pod. So, Jake, why don't you tell the audience a bit about what got you into following Middle Tennessee football and where they can find you?
So I'm born and raised Murfreesboro, Tennessean, always been an MTSU fan. I was actually very blessed early in high school to get a job covering local athletics, including the university. So I've been covering MTSU and football in specific for over 10 years now. I always make the joke that everyone always asks, well, surely you're a Tennessee fan, or surely you're a Vanderbilt or an Alabama fan. But I am born and raised a Murfreesboro MTSU fan through and through. But been doing the podcast, which is now turned actually to a radio show, but we keep the podcast namesake at Blue Raider Podcast. Of course, you can find us on X and Twitter at Blue Raider Pod. Anywhere that you listen to podcasts or consume them, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all the above. And of course, we also have a website at blueraiderpodcast.com where we upload all of our media. And this year, actually, we're going to get more into the written media as well. But plenty of coverage for our Blue Raiders this season.
Awesome. So yeah, that written media should be another good avenue for you to get some engagement and get people more knowledgeable about the team. So let's dive in here. So Blue Raiders, I will say one of the things that I, follow the most and kind of my niche within, the coverage is coaching carousel, hot seats, and that movement there. I was not really a fan of them cutting ties with Rick Stockstill a couple years ago. I thought he was a pretty good coach. He'd certainly been there a long time. Now, I do understand that in the end, things were not going great. I mean, the 4-8 his last year, but before that had 2 winning seasons. When they let him go and decided to move on, how did you feel about that? Did that go
I'm afraid
Jake?
I lost you, Mike.
Okay. Sorry, people.
I got about 3/4 of what you said.
Okay. So when they decided to move on from Stock, how did you feel about that? Did you agree with moving on?
Yeah, I did catch the beginning there about how you disagree with I guess your initial thought was to, go against the grain with the Stockstill firing. I will say locally in Murfreesboro, I think it was a long time overdue. Stockstill had over a 20-year career here in Murfreesboro where he had the ebbs and flows. I think the biggest mark, and this is coming from someone that was fan, now covers the team on a yearly annual basis, is that you just never had the marquee win. In his tenure here, there was 0 conference titles. Now, there is an asterisk there. He did have a co-championship title all the way back in 2008 with Troy. But if you go back and look at that season, you'll note that he actually lost the regular season matchup with Troy. And back then in the Sun Belt, there wasn't a title game. So if we're really taking this as a championship, you really got to take it with a grain of salt, considering you lost to the team that you tied with. So in the grand scheme of things, you have 0 conference championships in almost 2 decades of coaching. It took him over 10 years to actually win his first bowl game. And so for a lot of fans, the biggest mark is that you're just living in mediocrity. He was able to get to the 6-win mark every year at the end of his tail end of his career. And then even getting to bowl games, he had a losing record in bowl games. And so I think he finished his career 2 games at 500. And again, that just kind of epitomizes his entire tenure here. And so I think for most fans, it was just time to let go. And like you put it, even at the end of his career, it was his better years. He had his son, Brent Stockstill, be his quarterback for 4 years, led them to a bowl victory, led them to a Conference USA runner-up finish, which also left a really sore taste in a lot of people's mouths, where you're hosting the Conference USA championship, you run 12 men out on the field, and there's a penalty flag, and UAB is able to take kneels and run out the clock. So I think a lot of people were, again, locally might look at this as like, this had to happen. But I think nationally, and I think your opinion is validated, because I think at the end of the day, looking at the current state of affairs, I would take being 6-6 and losing in a bowl game every year versus consecutive years now where we're 3-9 and not even sniffing an opportunity to make a bowl game. So it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. But I always say that, like, the pastures are not always greener on the other side. I think some Blue Raider fans might be biting their tongue and being upset about that decision now, looking at it, but hindsight's always 2020.
And I think your point is also very valid in that we couldn't have anticipated Mason would be this bad in 2 years, and it's not a good reason to keep somebody in hindsight because the next guy did worse. Like, you can't predict that in real time. So I do understand the mindset of wanting more and not being satisfied and him not getting over that hump. So.
And it's a what have you done for me lately game now. You know, as in that time where they let go of Stockstill 3 years, what would be 3 years ago now, is you're changing this guard of transfer portal. Rick Stockstill was not one that was necessarily the most vocal guy. He also wasn't one that was great as far as pulling donor dollars. So you had to find someone who obviously can talk the talk. And that's where I think the Derek Mason hire made a lot of sense 2 years ago, was a guy that can do that.
And I will say, I dislike the Stockstill firing in real time. I did like the Mason hiring after that. So in the moment, I thought it was a good move. It hasn't worked out, but I will totally own that at the time I thought it was a decent move.
Yeah, and there's so much. And again, I think nationally, I think a lot of people share that same opinion, but locally, the Mason hire, and I'm maybe jumping ahead of ourselves here as we got a lot to talk about today.
Go for it. Yeah.
But with Mason locally, I mean, as a guy that was let go up in Nashville, coaching Vanderbilt, taking over the James Franklin era, a guy that had turned Vanderbilt into a program it hadn't seen in its entire program history. And I'm not going to say he tanked that Vanderbilt program, but he certainly took it back to the level that it was. Now, whether that's his fault, a lot of people might even point the finger at the administration at Vanderbilt prior to where they are now. And certainly Vanderbilt has a lot of faults of their own that it appears that they have ironed out now that Clark Lee is there. However, it's too close to home for the Murfreesboro fan. I mean, we're only 30, 45 minutes away from Nashville. A lot of people here that are fans of MTSU know what Derek Mason did at Vanderbilt and aren't happy with it. And so that hire, I think a lot of people were, maybe some people, again, from the football realm, this could be great for us. But from those that keep tabs on local universities like Vanderbilt, you're like, this could be bad. You're taking a coach that you knew could at least get you to 6 wins, and you're hiring a guy that struggled to win football games at the SEC level. Yeah. I think a lot of people were really holding their breath, and I think unfortunately it's been decisive thus far that it was a bad hire. But if there is any positive news, Derek Mason didn't get to a bowl game at Vanderbilt until his 3rd season. He had very similar starts to his time at Vanderbilt and turned that corner initially in year 3. And again, timeline now in Murfreesboro, he's going into year 3. So I think a lot of Blue Raider fans want to stay optimistic, and maybe this year 3 is that time we turn that corner.
And you'd hope so. You know, we'll kind of get into specifically rehashing last year and 3-9 we talked about, but that was kind of a snake bit 3-9. There was a 4-game stretch in the midseason where it was all 1-possession games, and some that were, you know, obviously very competitive, from Kennesaw, who won the conference, Missouri State, Delaware, Jacksonville. These were 4 of the better teams in the conference, and you took them to the wire, all 4 of them. So I remember watching the Jacksonville State game, you know, when it happened, and it was just all of them where you just couldn't get it done on the end, which certainly is the mark of a good team, is being able to find a way to win those games. but you weren't that far off in those 4 games either against good teams.
That's definitely been the message for Mason and I guess media personalities alike is if you want to speak any sort of level of optimism to this season, it's the point you just made. I think it was 5 games last year that they lost in total by a single possession. And even in Mike, your team in Marshall, they had a good football game going for 3.5 quarters.
Yep.
And then you found your quarterback of the future, and he took him for I think 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and that game just got out of hand really fast. But you would probably agree that score wasn't indicative of the outcome. And so
I think you guys were winning 28-21 going into the fourth quarter, and then it ended 42-28. Yeah.
Right. Correct. So that and that's kind of been back to your point. It's the mark of a good team is finding ways to win. And unfortunately for Mason and this group last year, it felt as though they were finding ways to lose games late. Absolutely. I want to say it was 5 single possession games that they lost, but at 4 games they led at one point or another in the second half, and they ended up losing those games. And so we're talking 4 games here. 4 games in a 3-9 season. You go from 3-9 and you're magically 7-5 and you're in a bowl game. And so, and you talk about the teams that you did it against. You mentioned Jacksonville State. You mentioned Kennesaw State. If you're able to turn those corners in those games and get a stop, a lot of those in both of those games, it was special teams that really put the dagger in them. But if you're able to get that stop late and not make those special teams bonehead plays late, your complexion of Derek Mason, your complexion of this football program is 100% different. But because you did it 4 separate times, particularly in conference play late in the year, it's really puts you behind the 8 ball talking about hot seats for Derek Mason this upcoming year.
And even winning 3 of those 5, that puts you in a bowl game. That is a successful year. You go 3-9 to bowl game in year 2. That's successful, and you're looking forward to the future and viewing that as we are having marked progress towards the future.
So, and he already put himself behind early on in the year. If we're just going to rehash that whole schedule, I mean, he started the year off with a loss at home to FCS opponent Austin Peay. Again, another school that's just down the road from Murfreesboro. Year 1 here, it took him a last fourth quarter game-winning drive against Tennessee Tech, another FCS school. You lost really in embarrassing fashion to Austin Peay to start off the year last year. So he's having to spend his whole time convincing and trying to get some buy-in from the city and the fans here that, hey, this season isn't completely lost. And it just felt like anytime they tried to get ahead, they fell back. But fortunately for them, they ended on a great note, winning 2 of the last 3. They found who they hoped to be the quarterback of the future due to an injury from Nick Vadiato last year. So there is some optimism because you did win those last 2 games, because it looked like there for a little while they were going to finish the year 1-11.
Yeah, no, that's and that would have been a disaster. I mean, 3-9 is not great. It's a far cry from 1. At 1-11, you are code red, Chernobyl level.
Does he finish? Yeah, that was the question
exactly.
going into those last 2 weeks was, does Derek Mason finish this year out? And I think to his benefit contractually, he's on a 5-year deal. I don't think until at the end of this 3rd year does that buyout get cut in half. So, and again, at 1-11, you're really you might cut your losses with the last 3 years on his contract and try to find someone who can take the gig.
Absolutely, yeah. That is something we will get into after we talk about the roster. But let's get into that. You talk about finding the QB of the future, and you guys have become the G6 cradle of Italian-American quarterbacks at Middle Tennessee, it seems like. So, I mean, I was making the one of my buddies does NFL draft stuff full-time, and I told him, I was having you on, and he said, wow, it'll be interesting not having Vadiato. It seemed like the guy was there forever, and it kind of did. Yeah.
And it's kind of a sour ending to his career here. Yes. I mean, the story for those that don't know of Nick Vadiato, his freshman year here, they go to a bowl game, the Hawaii Bowl. He had only started 2 games that year and then took over in the bowl game, ended up winning offensive MVP en route to that final bowl victory for the Blue Raiders. So, and in his lineage of his time here, he's also seeing that transition of transfer portal, NIL deals. I mean, that's how long this guy had been in college. Yeah. And then also, there was some rumors that he may be moving on with the coaching change from Stockstill. I mean, the guy had a different offensive coordinator in 4 of his 5 seasons here. This, with Stockstill leaving, this is my opportunity out. However, he stayed in. Derek Mason welcomed him with open arms and for good things, because I think he was the bright spot in that redshirt senior year. However, his graduate year, we saw dwindling numbers. Some people would point the finger at his offensive coordinator, Bodie Reeder, who is no longer on staff with Coach Mason. And then it finally just kind of came to a head of he hurt his shoulder with 4 weeks left in the year. And that's when they had to turn over to backup quarterback Roman Gagliano. So I love Nick Vattiato for who he is as a person. He's an outstanding individual. I hated the way that it ended, but it was time to finally turn that corner, because Nick the completion percentage, something that he was known for, was dwindling. His sack totals were up, and a lot of that had to do with his lack of ability to evade. And so I think it was time to try something new. And again, for better or for worse, it certainly helped out Mason finally biting the bullet and moving on to another quarterback.
Absolutely. And I think for all those reasons you pointed out, it was time to hand over the reins to the next guy in Gagliano. You talked about him. So going into this year, QB wise, we also have a new Anthony Salfo comes over from Southeastern Louisiana. He'd been a long time Southland Conference guy. He coached at Northwestern State before that, where I was a GA several years ago. So definitely familiar with him. But the new offense, what can our fans expect? With the new O coordinator, what kind of offense are we going to see?
Well, that's another question we've all been kind of wondering. His time at Southeastern Louisiana, very run heavy. And that was always an interesting addition because they got an offensive coordinator that loves to run the football, or at least so he did in his very short stint as an offensive coordinator at Southeastern Louisiana. When Bodie Reeder arrived on campus, the previous offensive coordinator, something that Coach Mason said was that I want an offense that can run the football first and then pass the football second. And if you watch MTSU over the last 2 seasons, they were not a run-first offense by any stretch of the imagination. So it was very counterintuitive to the type of style that at least Coach Mason would ideally like to run. Now, again, take that with a grain of salt, considering he is a defensive coordinator by nature. So he never really had any say in what the offense did or what their philosophy was. But it is kind of refreshing to see him hire an offensive coordinator that does seem to live by the run first style offense, ground and pound. So you bring in a guy like Anthony Salfo, who had himself Antonio Martin 2 seasons ago, who was going for the FCS equivalent of the Heisman Trophy. So that's always a great addition there. And then also, again, to get a little ahead of ourselves, he's transferring into MTSU. So he's getting his old running back, and then the new addition of a quarterback that has very mobile legs, but also has the arm to make all the throws. So back to the original question, I do not know what the offense will look like in 2 weeks when we kick off. However, it does point to a great stable of running backs that I think that this will finally be the balanced look that Derek Mason wants, because he has a skill set in the backfield that he can make both of those types. He can run the football efficiently. He can throw the ball efficiently. He has great weapons. So I don't know, to answer it truthfully, I would love to think that this team is going to run the football more than we've been accustomed to. However, you're always going to be held up by how good or bad your offensive line is. And that's been another big question mark for this team moving forward, is how good can the offensive line actually be?
And who will be running the ball? Most everything I looked at in the different depth charts listed it by committee. So, Antonio Martin came in from Kansas State. Terrence Brown came in from Saginaw Valley at a lower level. And then DJ Taylor was also in that mix. So far in fall camp or through the spring, has it very much been by committee, or has anybody taken the reins on that job?
The uniqueness of this running back group is the fact that you mentioned Antonio Martin. He is a running back's running back. I mean, this guy looks the part. He has the legs. He can do it. He's going to be a workhorse for this team. I would be stunned if we line up against Murray State in a week and a half and Antonio Martin is not the first one in the backfield. And I
he's
also
that bowling ball. 5'9", 220. He looks the part of that bowling ball type guy. Yeah.
And it would be a disservice to him if he didn't at least get 20 carries a night for the Blue Raiders. So I would fully anticipate him being the workhorse. But you do mention Terrence Brown, who does come from a Division II school. He is, for Tennessee local people, he's a Tajay Spears. He can run the ball, but he's equally as good at catching the ball and running after catch. So I like his skill set to complement Antonio Martin as someone that may be a third down back that you can kind of use as a gadget guy. And then you mentioned DJ Taylor, who is a local running back who is a state champion 100-meter winner. So someone that obviously has quickness and he has greater length over what you might see with Antonio Martin. He had some issues with the fumbles this last year, but I think you would take that with the freshman season that he had. And so hopefully he's coming back from injury this year. He would be utilized as a really great running back 3 option. And in a worst case scenario, it's a great depth piece to add to the Brown Martin duo.
Okay. Good. That's good to know. That certainly helps me flesh out a little bit of that group. Let's move on to the receivers. And very few teams were hurt more in the portal than you guys at the receiver position. Najee Cox was very good. I was a big fan last year. He is at Kansas now, and Amorion Walker is at UNLV. So, with that group, Marcus Allen portaled in from Mississippi State. Cameron Lacey is there. Most things I have seen do have Lacey listed as the number 1, and then Hogan Wasson, also a guy in that mix. So, what can you tell us about that position group?
I would even add in to Hunter Tipton. He was a tight end who also transferred out to Memphis last year. And with Bodie Reeder, again, a change in offensive coordinators, he loved to utilize a tight end. And Hunter Tipton had, I think it was 700 receiving yards this last year. So I don't want to say that we're only missing 2 wide receivers. We're really missing 3. And so who's going to step up? You mentioned Cam Lacey as the lone returner, at least someone that received a lot of snaps last year. I am of the camp that Cam Lacey is the future of Blue Raider offense. I love Cam Lacey. I've been excited about this guy in camp from 2 years ago, the second he arrived on campus. He's a shifty, great hands, one of the quickest, best route runners that they have on this team. So I'm super excited to see him take that step up from his 500 yards receiving last year and potentially be one of those 1,000-yard guys. But outside of that, you mentioned Marcus Allen, someone who fell from Mississippi State. A lot of guys that come from SEC schools tend to do pretty well when they come down to Conference USA. He has the body type that will do particularly well in Conference USA. I like him a lot. Another one is Hogan Wasson. He is a D2 All-American coming to MTSU, not just because he's a white guy, but he is very Wes Welker-esque. He's a very short, shifty. He's going to be playing a lot of slot wide receiver, but he has great catch in traffic ability that I'm excited to kind of see that utilized as well. And then a newcomer, Neo Clifton. He's a local talent who took a red shirt last year, who, according to offensive coordinator Anthony Selfo in his last media availability, said that he had a great camp and we could expect to see a lot from the young man.
He was another guy, a good 6'2", 210, so good size too when I was.
Highly sought after too locally. I know he had a few P4 offers out of high school, so it was really one of the bigger gets in his signing class 2 seasons ago.
Nice. And at that tight end position, you had mentioned Tipton going to Memphis. Will Tavion Galloway, Jaden Hambrick, who's going to be the guy at that position? Those were the 2 names that I seem to come across the most.
Galloway obviously has a P4 pedigree, a 4-star out of high school. He transferred him to TSU from Purdue. Didn't get a lot of snaps last year, again, because Hunter Tipton was just the receiving type tight end that Bodie Reeder liked to utilize. And back to the offensive coordinator discussion, the tight end position's weird. If you're going to use this as someone that's more of a blocking tight end, I don't know that Galloway is the guy. But I also don't necessarily know who is that next guy, because I've been pretty underwhelmed with the tight end group collectively. Now, Galloway obviously has amazing size, particularly for Conference USA. So if we do see Selfo like to utilize the tight end more in that receiving role, I think Galloway is going to be that guy. But to be truthful with you, I would expect the tight end position to kind of take a step back from where we've seen this program in the last couple of years.
Perfect. That's very helpful there. Let's move to the O-line now. And being a Minnesota guy who taught and coached high school there for a number of years, Reese Tripp was the first one that caught my eye. Of course, a transfer from the Golden Gophers, who is from southern Minnesota originally. And PJ Fleck's had a lot of good O linemen. They've also had a lot who have transferred out and had success elsewhere. I expect him to do that for you guys. Where do you expect him to? Will he right, left tackle? Which spot do you expect him to pencil in at?
That's still something that I know the staff is still trying to figure out. I think just based on size, he's got to obviously be a left or a right tackle, as you mentioned. But I like him as far as skill set at left tackle. Now, they did bring in another D2 All-American in Tim Jacobs from Ohio Dominican, so someone that's going to be pushing him. But those two alone are some of the bigger guys that they have here on campus. Interior lineman wise, there's still a little bit more of a battle there. But excuse me, I'm also forgetting Zach Clayton, another young guy that's on roster as a sophomore that could also be pushing Zach actually transferred out to Western Kentucky. I'm blanking right now, but I know that Reese and Tim Jacobs are the two guys that they like at tackle the most. But they're still filling out a lot with the offensive line. And back to the topic of wanting to run the football, how good can this offensive line be to actually make you want to run the football? That there's still a lot of questions. And to the Reese Tripp of it all, the guy that doesn't have a lot of experience.
No.
Now he has great size and he'll fit in well for Conference USA, but they've taken some chances on guys in years past. I'm looking at EJ Harris, someone else that hit the transfer portal this last year that was from Auburn, someone we were super excited about, but just that lack of experience caught up to him quickly in Conference USA.
It's good to know. Yeah. The other ones who were on my depth chart anyway, this one had Tripp at left tackle, Travaris Edwards at right. The guards were Alex Gale and Otto Jensi von Rensburg, and then Chris Moreno was at center.
Yeah, Otto, I anticipate he's coming back from an injury as well, but Otto and Alex Gale were big surprises this last year as interior linemen. I still don't know what they're going to do at the center position. Travaris Edwards, I would imagine he's going to be more of an interior lineman. Chris Moreno is someone that has some interior lineman experience as well. So I would think they're still vying out for who's going to be center. I wouldn't be surprised if they did go with Alex Gale at center, but a lot of shuffling still.
Yeah, this one has Gale at left guard and Moreno at center, so who knows? Yeah. Let's kick over to the defensive side of the ball, where pretty 4-3-3-4. It seems like they're going to be playing what a lot of people are. That fourth guy's kind of an edge type guy. But correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like looking at numbers, the defense against the pass, they really struggled. They weren't covering well. They weren't rushing the passer well. That's really where teams were getting after them, just their inability to get sacks and create turnovers. What else can you tell us about the defense from last year?
Well, you said it. They're bad, really, at everything. And that's kind of the biggest disappointment because you have Derek Mason, who obviously has a defensive coordinator pedigree. Mm-hmm. And then you also have Brian Stewart, who has been defensive coordinating at all levels of football for almost 30 years now. And so you would think that with any given roster that they could put together a solid defense. Now, I think you could point, if you watch enough MTSU football, you could point fingers at a lot of people for a lot of different things. The offense wasn't very good, so therefore the defense was on the field the entire game, which also, going back to our point earlier about losing games in the fourth quarter, when your defense doesn't have their legs underneath them, they're bound to make mistakes. They're bound to give up the big play. That was a big problem for them this last year. You talked about the secondary, how they're not great in coverage. They were, I would say they were very undersized and outmanned in the secondary this last year because Conference USA, as versatile as these offenses can be, you're looking at Jacksonville State as someone that loves to run the option and will run it to death. And then you're going to face the spread like Tyson Helton at Western Kentucky. And then you got teams like Kennesaw State who do a really good job of disguising and being a really balanced attack. And so with that, you have to have versatile defenses. And it felt like our defense last year was just a one-trick pony. And they had a great front seven. They had one of the best rush defenses in Conference USA, but they had one of the worst pass defenses. And so they were in this weird area where they couldn't get any sort of pass rush to help the defensive secondary. But you still have to be able to defend for long enough time for that defensive pass rush to get there. So they were never able to, I wouldn't say they as in defensive coordinator Stewart and Derek Mason, they were never able to dial up that pressure or at least get it well enough where they're able to assist that secondary who struggled a lot last season. They were one of the lowest in Conference USA in turnovers as well. So that's just an area that they could certainly be better. So when you're turning to 2026, the front seven was fantastic. You had a lot of graduations. You had a lot of portal hits. That's really going to have to make them rebuild. But luckily, the defensive line stayed intact. It's about rebuilding that secondary line and linebacker. And then can you actually build a defensive secondary that can make you competitive in Conference USA? Because they lost a lot of games getting beat by the big plays.
Funny you say that, because that brought me back to another conversation I had about this episode. We were talking about college fantasy football and then individual player props, and my friend made a comment similar to what you said where about being one-sided. They were very easy to prop bet against because if it was a running back, they were usually going to go under, but if it was a receiver or quarterback, they were likely to go over. So you almost
guaranteed.
You almost knew going in, this is the bet that will hit one way or the other on them. So.
And it's, I guess if you're going to be good at something, you want to be great at it, right? And that front seven was very good. I mean, you had guys that Parker Hughes that actually got picked up and drafted in the 7th round by the Jacksonville Jaguars, just kind of spearheading that. And then you had 3 guys that hit the portal and, in my opinion, upgraded to their next program. So that is the beauty or the downfall of G5 football or G6 football, if you will. But that front seven was great. It's just unfortunate that they couldn't have a good secondary that fit well with them. Yeah.
To me, though, Shakai Woods was an interesting loss, like going to Arkansas State there. That was because they're in the Sun Belt, but they're not a lot better. Like you'd get if you're losing them to massive programs. They're not that though. So
we're going to get quite into a philosophical conversation here about the Sun Belt versus Conference USA, because people have a lot of opinions on it. But I think you would be a fool to think that the Conference USA is way better than the Sun Belt, or even to say that the Sun Belt is way better than Conference USA. But I think the way it sits right now, the Sun Belt is just a better conference.
Yeah.
And now I know that there's not more money there, as we've learned with Louisiana Tech moving on to do so. But all things considered, I just think that there's better football right now. And if you're a player who's going into one of his final years, does money matter? Does getting to a bowl game matter? What is important to a player? And when you've sat on a team that's won 6 games in 2 years, if winning is of the highest importance to you, I mean, Arkansas State can win football games, or at least has proven that they can win more football games, more so than we have here in Murfreesboro.
And if we're looking at the 2 conferences on the whole, Butch is one of the more stable coaches. He's been there a while, has been at multiple other schools before, a guy who has coached a lot of guys who went, this dude coached J.J. Watt and Antonio Brown in college at CMU for brief periods. So the guy knows what he's doing, and that's going to be appealing. But you're right. I think there is the misconception among Sunbelt people that we have a lot more money and resources than CUSA. That is not the case. The numbers are what they are, and it shows that that's not. Where we have done better is there's more stability, I think, in the Sunbelt. A lot of the coaches anyway, have been here longer, or a lot of them who have left have done so for bigger jobs. But the Sunbelt has adapted pretty well to the NIL era relative to, it's an area where both of our conferences are pulling ahead of the MAC, who is falling way behind everybody else in the NIL and portal era. So
It's certainly something in 5 years I would love to see where both of these conferences go, because they've obviously taken totally separate approaches
Yes.
to the monster, where Conference USA has really sold out for their football. However, as a byproduct, for whatever reason, basketball has turned a big corner for them. When you're comparing the MAC to the Sun Belt to the Conference USA outside of the football realm, Conference USA is head over heels better in the basketball realm.
Yeah. And
Baseball, the Sun Belt has done
and
a much better job in that realm.
exactly, after the SEC, the Sun Belt's probably the second best baseball playing conference in the country now for whatever reason. But yeah, it's interesting how those divergent paths made in football have affected everywhere else of the athletic programs, which might happen when you're the financial juggernaut of the athletic programs.
And
But
that's a conversation that I think people in the MAC don't want to have. Is like I said, in 5 years, where does the MAC end up? Because they don't have the basketball. I mean, obviously there's basketball interest in the MAC, and they have great attendance numbers relative to what Conference USA and Sunbelt does. But the better basketball is being played in Conference USA, and obviously the baseball is non-existent. And so, where does a conference like the MAC keep up, because the football is not performing that well, at least in my opinion. And again, I'm talking completely subjectively here. There's nothing objective, but I just like to think that at least Conference USA and Sunbelt are well-rounded, that
yes.
they're able to stay afloat in this era where, where does the MAC end up in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So did a series of articles before about like coaching hot seat in each conference and talking about that stability. In the MAC, you have Chuck Martin and Chris Creighton are both entering year 13. No other coach has been at their school more than 4 years. So it's very new across the board. And not only that, you look at in the MAC, it is really tough for those schools to keep young guys or any guy that has even one good year. You're usually bolting in the offseason for a power conference or a bigger paycheck. There's just no roster retention in that conference now. Even guys who, like Caden Simmons is a great example, given the Tulane news today. He starts at QB at Ball State as a freshman, goes to Tulane, loses the battle last year, stays at Tulane, loses the battle this year to Zion Chris. They announced that today. But if you're the MAC and you can't keep a guy like that who then is back up 2 years in a row somewhere else at another G6 school, that's a problem for you as a conference.
And yeah, I couldn't agree.
Yeah,
but and circling it back to MTSU's situation, yes. I mean, that's where they are. A lot of these defensive guys have left. Like you talk about Shakai Woods, and then another one is Anthony Bynum. He went to Georgia Southern. So having guys that are your top end talent transfer, and they're not even getting, like you say, to that P4 level. It's not excellent, and it's not good for the future. But if it is any indication, though, that Derek Mason is able to find talented defensive linemen, he feels good about this group, and particularly defensive coordinator Brian Stewart feels good about this group. So hopefully, if you can create a winning culture here, those guys are more likely to at least exercise the thought of staying.
Good. Yeah, you need to have that stability, and ideally, that's an area they can improve upon, in this year and in the years moving forward. But let's get a little bit into the schedule. So you had mentioned Murray State is the season opener, and after that, of course, Marshall. That game will be played about a block and a half this way from where I'm at now, and Nevada, one of the teams you beat last year, when the only non-con win, though. Didn't you beat them on the road last year, right? That game is at home this year?
Correct. They won on a game-winning drive.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw 14-13 there. So then first at Jacksonville State will be a tough conference opener. That's not, I wouldn't envy anybody in the conference going there. And then at Kansas is the final non-conference game. But looking at this schedule and considering the roster, we talked about what are expectations going into this year.
I've said all off season long, I think that this roster is good, and it obviously is very talented in some places over others. I think going into this year, my expectation is to at least get 4 wins. That's got to be the floor for this group. You talked about Murray State, who is picked last in the Missouri Valley Conference, so you're finally getting an easy, which sounds bad, but you're finally getting an easy FCS opponent. Nevada under head coach Choate has not been anything that you should be scared of. You should be winning that game. I mean, even last year, if you don't win that game, you're still looking at a 2-win season, but potentially even an 0-for season. I mean, you won it on a game-winning drive late. But anyways, I digress. You got to win the Nevada game, particularly because it's at home. Then you don't really see winnable games until you get to the end of the year when you face Sam Houston on the road, and then you end the season with New Mexico State, who are the 2 bottom feeders along with yourself in Conference USA entering this year. So I say that everyone says that for Coach Mason to keep his job, he needs to be working towards 6. And I don't know how talented this team is yet. We haven't learned that yet because they've only been playing against each other and playing against the air. So I don't know, but I would think a successful year you've got to be looking to 6 wins. You've got to sneak one of these out. These games that you're talking about last year that you lost in the fourth quarter, you've got to find a way to turn those into a victory here. 4, I think, is the floor for this team. But if we want some job security here, he's got to get to 6. And where that is, it's tough. You listen to the early part of that schedule. Marshall looks great. Kansas is a winnable P4 game, but I don't like it. And so that's not a game that you should be marking down a win. So where can you turn the tide? Is it Delaware? Is it FIU finally? Can you beat one of your old coaches here? Liberty is always a question mark. Western is probably a loss. Jack State, as you said, is going to be a loss. But you got to find a way. You got to find a way to win one of these awkward midweek games. Catch one of these teams on one of their 6-week turnarounds or 6-day turnaround. That's your best chance.
That's a good point. Yeah, with the Tuesday, Wednesday games, the days off will not always be even. But I do think to get to 6 wins, and that has to be the goal. I agree with you there. You really want to start 2-1. You really want to get Murray State and Nevada, and then looking at the whole conference home games, Delaware. Then you have Kennesaw, WKU back-to-back with New Mexico State at the end. Those 2 home games in the middle are tough. It's I think you certainly could get one of them. Unlikely you get both, though. They were 2 of the better teams in the conference last year. So you at FIU, at Liberty, at Sam Houston. Getting 2 of those seems winnable, though. And then we got to 6 by doing that, if that goes well. So I certainly think it could happen, and hope it does. But
in Derek Mason's short tenure here, he hasn't had the best of luck with the midweek draws. I know in his first year, he had to play 3 games in 15 days with the midweek schedule. And then last year he had, I believe it was a 6-day turnaround a 6-day work week last year as a turnaround. This year, for the first time, he has a bye week going into the midweek games, and then he has a typical 7-day schedule, and then he has an 8-day schedule. So he actually has a normal pacing, and then he actually has a bye week after that Kennesaw State game. So he has good pacing this year, so you can't really lean on that as an excuse. He had 2 of the 3 midweek games are at home, and again, as you put it, they're winnable. Delaware, who does return a lot of production, but that was a game last year that you kind of just gave away in the fourth quarter against a budding star in Minicucci. And then Kennesaw State, who I've always said, Kennesaw State, I give them their roses. They won the games that mattered, and they won a conference championship. But I've always said that I don't think Kennesaw State was the best team last year. They just knew how to win football games, and that obviously did well for them. They're finding a new quarterback this year. It's going to see how much of last year was a fluke, and obviously we'll kind of know who Kennesaw State is when they come here in week 8, I believe it is. And so there's still a lot to iron out. But
Ricky Collins will be interesting QB.
Correct. So by that time of the year, we'll have a temperature gauge on how good or bad this MTSU team is. But circling those midweek game, that could be the turning point for this season.
Yes, no, that's a good point. So let's one thing I always ask my viewers, ceiling and floor record wise, what is, and you alluded to 4 being the floor for an what do you think the ceiling is, best case scenario?
I mean, I'll even being completely optimistic. 6 wins would be the ceiling. I
Okay.
just have and a lot of it is question marks regarding what does the offense look like with a new coordinator? Does he actually know how to run an offense? Because as I said, Derek Mason is pretty hands off, and Anthony Selfa only has 2 seasons as an offensive coordinator duties, and really he was a co-offensive coordinator at best, sharing the duties with his dad. And so, can Anthony Selfa actually lead a Division 1A FBS offense? That's the big question. And then secondly, does the defensive personnel changes that they made in the transfer portal actually equate to a better defense that can supplement a mediocre offense? So I still think in best case scenario, this conference is still good at the top half with Liberty, Western Kentucky, Kennesaw, and Jacksonville State leading a lot of the polls.
Yeah.
But I don't see a world where even in their best season they can get over 6. I would be ecstatic, and obviously people in Murfreesboro would be ecstatic because if they're over 6, then they're likely vying for a position in the conference championship game.
Could be. Yep.
But I think best case scenario, this team gets to 6 wins in the regular season and could potentially obviously get a bowl bid.
Oh, that'd be huge progress, especially after how the last 2 years have went.
And I think again the national landscape would agree with that. But fans locally, they're harsh. They want to win now. You've got to start winning now. And so the 6 wins save his job. Obviously, I think you send him back for year 4, but he's still going to be on this prove it to me in year 4. And so I think for Mason's interest, you've got to win more than 6. The six cannot be the pinnacle of what you're aiming for. You've got to be, if you're Mason, you've got to be pushing for 7, 8. You've got to be pushing to be content. You want to be in week 10 thinking, hey, a few weird situation and outcomes, we could maybe find the conference championship game, similar to what Kennesaw was going through last year.
That's true.
Hey, maybe we're a few wacky Conference USA games away from falling into 7, 8 wins. So I think that's really where the program should be pushing for. But I think back to the original question at hand, 6 is where I think that ceiling realistically could go to.
I think that's very fair. Yeah. So in looking at the rest of the conference, is it going to be the usual suspects near the top, or do you expect that maybe a dark horse or someone we don't expect could push for that conference title game? Like for me, I'll say in looking at it, I think Jacksonville State's going to be competitive as usual. I'm very curious to see how FIU does under year 2 of Willie Simmons. I like that hire. He did good there. In year 1, the progress they make is very interesting to me. So, they would be the one potential dark horse, and I don't even know how much of a dark horse they would be, but they're one who I'm curious to see what FIU does. But beyond that, it's Jacksonville, Kennesaw, WKU. We're not saying anything that is shocking to people. Would probably be. And the other one, I'll say one more. I don't know what to expect from Liberty. Massively disappointing last year. The year before that, they were down by their standards anyway, even though they weren't terrible. Freeze, they were good. Chadwell's first year, they were very good. Then they've kind of regressed since then. So I don't know where they go from here, really.
Mike, it is so refreshing to hear someone talk about G6 football and they know what they're talking about, because a lot of people, when they look at Conference USA, they could be filling out their poll and say, oh, 1 is Liberty. Oh, because for what? For what reason? They made a Fiesta Bowl a couple of years ago. There's no reason to think that Jamie Chadwell and Liberty has this conference in the bag year in and year out. Like you said it's been a disappointment, especially considering the grand scheme of money and NIL. Liberty could buy the best football team G6 has to offer.
Yes,
and Jamie Chadwell marches out of this mediocre, barely gets to 6-win football team, and people still write him in.
3 years ago, if we were talking, we would have said Jamie Chadwell will be at a P4 school in 2026. Now we're not even talking about him in the running for these jobs.
I was one of those people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I said, how
Oh, yeah.
long does Jamie Chadwell stay? I mean, Liberty has enough money to keep him there as long as he wants, but
Yeah.
he obviously had the pedigree of winning football games at that level that you thought, yeah, he's just going to be another Hugh Freeze. And then Liberty's just going to be this carousel of G5, G6 call ups to P4s. But I digress from that. To your question, I love Jack State. I've said all season long, when you return your quarterback in Caden Creel, I know you lose your running back, but under Charles Kelly, they have to have the best chance. And back to the money conversation, what Charles Kelly is able to do at Jack State, who, again, I'm going off of, there's probably a pie chart somewhere that proves what I'm saying, but Jack State probably has the least amount of funding of any team in this conference besides maybe FIU in the realm of athletics. But he does, I mean, obviously he's a great football coach. That's what it comes down to. But he's a great talent identifier. He's able to coach him up with what he's got, and he does great things. I love what Jack State has to offer, particularly because they return Caden Creel at quarterback. I love them.
Yeah.
Tyson Helton.
Losing Cam Cook obviously is massive for them, but it looks like they're gonna replace him with a running back by committee. I think they figured it out. I think Kelly and their offense is good enough to figure that out.
If there was anything to buy stock into, it's the fact that Jacksonville State will figure it out on the offensive side. Charles Kelly's a great offensive mind. They'll figure it out even with the absence of Cam Cook. But the rest of the conference, I like Tyson Helton for no other reason other than the fact that he can consistently get them to 7-8 wins every year. They're always on that edge of Conference USA championship discussion because he's a heck of a coach. Now, that's the other kind of back to the Chadwell conversation. Helton hasn't really taken that program over into that consistent championship pedigree team. So does he turn that corner for them this year? That's another big question mark. Can Kennesaw State replicate what they did last year? That's a big question mark. Now, you mentioned Willie Simmons as a dark horse at FIU, and obviously previous coaching gig here in Murfreesboro with Coach Rick Stockstill really sour topic for a lot of MTSU fans because that was someone that MTSU fans actually thought would be hired in lieu of Derek Mason because of the ties to the program and obviously the success he was having at Florida A&M. So as much as I want to see him succeed, obviously in spite of MTSU, but I love your tidbit on them being a potential dark horse. Now they too have some quarterback situations that they've got to kind of iron out. But Willie Simmons has proved to me so far that he can coach him up. And obviously in Miami, you're in a hotbed of recruiting. He's done a really good job of recruiting the area. In my opinion, he's surpassed Florida Atlantic, someone that those roles were reversed a couple years ago. So I think he's headed in the right direction as well. And I don't really want to count out Missouri State. Missouri State is in that gray area as they're going through a coaching transition as well with one of the youngest coaches in college football. And so how does Missouri State look, another program that puts all their money in basketball? So maybe, football is kind of put on the wayside. So Conference USA is rich.
During the wintertime, shortly after they hired the new head coach, I had a Missouri State guy on, and he's follows them closely, and he's involved with their NIL collective, and it does sound like they're finally getting some meaningful backing up there. That is not all going to basketball. Yeah.
And it's funny how winning just does that, right? Like if Missouri State rolls into this last season and they just have the mediocre year that I picked them dead last in my poll last year going into the preseason because this is an FCS school.
They came here in week 3 and beat us last year. Yeah.
Right. So like a team that I just thought would they would just make their transition but Conference USA has quite the track record of teams coming in year one and doing particularly well. So I'm excited for Casey Woods. He's someone that I think locally here, I know some guys that are more in the football realm that follow the head coaching carousels and the coaching carousels that really like Casey Woods as a potential target in the world where we move on from Derek Mason prematurely. So I think Missouri State got themselves a really good coach. So I think it'll be Conference USA is just so rich in coaching talent, as well as talent acquisition. You see so many guys move up from Conference USA to these P4s. So I'm not going to be an advocate just for MTSU here, but I'm a big advocate for Conference USA and really good G6 football. There's a reason that the midweek exists is so these guys can get that exposure. So I'm super excited for what Conference USA has to offer this year.
Awesome. No, that's great to hear. if you would have to pick right now, I'll get it. So these are some questions I ask everybody on our way out. Right now, if you had to pick the two teams to play in the Conference USA title game, who do you think it would be?
My pick today would be Jack State and Western Kentucky. I think those are your two best rosters in the conference right now, and you have two coaches that have proven that they can win football games regardless of their circumstances. I mean, Tyson, like I said, Tyson Helton lost his quarterback mid-year and then found Rodney Tisdale, who has the potential to be dare I say, an offensive MVP dark horse. And so I like that coaching staff.
Any starting quarterback in that, it's the system more than the guy. Like any QB that starts there could be, yeah. Same with the bell cow running back at Jacksonville State if they have one. Yeah.
Correct. And that's why I say those two programs, you insert name here, they're going to be a great player for those programs. And so again, as much of a toss-up as this conference is, those two programs particularly stick out.
And I would agree with you. I would say those two. You made an interesting point, though, with Helton being very successful, never getting over the hump. And it's odd to me, in the multiple years he's been there, a lot of success. He's never won the conference. Since he most people would not guess, they would have thought he would have won it once or twice. Hasn't happened for him yet, and that's. Yeah.
You and me, Mike, we share this common ground that we don't like Western Kentucky, right? I think that we're supposed to go on here and badmouth Western Kentucky, but I agree that it is funny though how I like to say that the fan base in Bowling Green is very spoiled, because I would trade 8-win seasons right now and still not have a conference championship. But I can see where Western Kentucky, because it does strike close to home. We talked about Rick Stockstill at the top of this episode, a guy that could get you to 6, 7, 8 wins, but never, almost 20 years, never won a conference championship. So is Tyson Helton, is he writing that script now early? Are Bowling Green fans ready to turn that page? Are they ready to say he can't get it done? It's been almost 10 years now. We need to turn the page. And for their logic, they have seen this with Rick Stockstill down at MTSU. And again, I would give him benefit of the doubt and say he's too good. Winning 8, 7 games every year is totally different than where Rick Stockstill was winning 6 and 5. So I would give him a much longer leash, but I don't necessarily hate the urgency that Western Kentucky fans have to move on from Tyson if he can't finally get one.
And for my viewers out there that may remember, Topper Talk was the guy, Moff. I had him as a guest. I had him as a guest a while back. One of the best episodes. He's fantastic. Very, extremely knowledgeable about that fan base and team and their inner workings. He was very much a pleasure to have on the show.
I know tons of. I get to chat with a lot of people in Conference USA, and me and Moff are both members of the Conference USA Roundtable. But I would, if I could give anyone else a shout out on this show, I had the opportunity. It's Stephen Moffitt. He does a great job covering all things Western Kentucky. Highly complimentary of the work that he does there, and his co-host Tyler Bailey as well.
I'm trying to think. The other CUSA guys, Jake McGee, I think it was. He did a FIU.
Yeah, he does the I think it's the Boca Bowl. He's transitioned now to a different podcast, but he covers both FAU and FIU.
And then there was.
I'm a big fan of March to the Pod. They do great work covering Sam Houston stuff. And they're still obviously in the come up stage. Yeah. But Ben Sorrells is the guy that does the March to the Pod, and he is it is so impressive how knowledgeable he is of everything Sam Houston. This guy could talk on any subject you wanted to in Sam Houston realm. He knows everything about, and he's a great follower of Conference USA as well. So again, moving forward, anyone that has great Conference USA content, Ben Sorrells at March to the Pod. I like a lot.
The other real Kai Millett, Owl Chat podcast,
Kennesaw.
Kai was very good. Yeah. So, lots of good. For those of you out there who want to learn more about Conference USA, the guys we just mentioned all do great work. So, we're getting near our hour. Jake, I'm going to ask our 3 final questions. So, what coach in Conference USA is on the hottest seat?
I think that's an easy one. It's the man here at home. It's got to be
it is.
Derek Mason, right?
It
Yeah,
has to be. Yes.
but I'll throw you a little curveball. I would say too that Tony Sanchez out at New Mexico State, a guy that's been there for 4 years, also in his previous tenure at UNLV, a guy hasn't had a winning record.
How did he get that job in the first place?
I mean, they're trying to save pennies on the dollar. Really, is I think is what it comes down to.
And I think they wanted the continuity candidate because he was with Jerry Kill.
Right. So if I had to give you something outside of the elephant in the room, I think Tony Sanchez would be another candidate that, aside from money, New Mexico State needs to save the money. I don't know that they can necessarily afford to fire Tony Sanchez right now, but in any other world where the school had the money, Tony Sanchez would have already been gone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Second question. What coach with a really good season or two could bump up to a P4 job or get a way better job?
Are we just, I guess we're talking just in the realm of Conference USA?
Yep.
I think the only thing that's really marking against Conference USA as a whole is everyone is kind of a young coach, at least in their position, if you will. I mean, Jamie Chadwell and Tyson Helton are the longest tenured coaches in this conference. Everyone else has been here for less than 3 years, with the exception of Tony Sanchez. Truthfully, it would have to be Jamie Chadwell just because of that season he had a few years ago. I think Tyson Helton would be great to get the move up as an offensive coordinator at the P4 level. They're definitely paying more for offensive coordinators at the P4 level than they are paying head coaches. I mean, I don't know what his contract looks like in Bowling Green, but just based on age and experience, I would think Chadwell or Helton would be the first in line.
I agree. Hold on. You're right about that, though. For me, Chadwell's a good one. Jerry Mack is one I waffle on. Does another good year to get him a Power 4 job. I think what he did was very impressive last year, and he's a guy that could be in that mix.
And so, how much was, and like I said, how much was last year a fluke? I like to sit here and say that he is a good coach. He's another guy that actually applied for the MTSU job when it came open 2 years ago because he was just up the road in Knoxville. And so a lot of people thought that was another guy who would have a lot of interest coming to Conference USA school. The administration here, he was one of the early ones that they marked off the list as they didn't reach out to him, which now, again, in the face of defeat, looks really, really bad considering he won a conference championship in his first year. But yeah, Mac is certainly an interesting one.
And the last question I ask, I've only been doing this one for a couple weeks. If we get off of this record and Derek Mason is no longer the Middle Tennessee head coach, who do you want them to hire as their head coach tomorrow?
That's a wild one. To be truthful with you, I guess it depends on the circumstances in which he would have gotten fired.
Fair.
Because you would obviously hiring from within would be the easiest route. Brian Stewart would be a shoe-in, but you're asking probably.
Let's imagine this is not literally tomorrow when the season is going to start.
Right.
Imagine this is the day after Thanksgiving, and we're making a long-term hire. I'll tell you mine for you guys, because I like to connect the dots and find people with the former O coordinator. Buster Faulkner is the guy I would probably pick for you guys.
The name Faulkner has definitely gone in circles here. I've even heard that people like the idea that they could poach Willie Simmons from Miami is also circulated. But if you're Willie Simmons, you're in your recruiting grounds down there in Miami. You've spent so much time in the Florida.
He was at FAU. Realm. FAU. Yeah, FAMU. Yeah.
So you would have no reason to even exercise leaving there. But he's certainly someone. There's also, and I'll even speak this one into existence just for the sake of those that listen and made it this far. There's a local head coach in Kevin Creasy. This is a far cry, and anyone that follows this program closely is probably laughing that this would never happen. But it wouldn't be the first time it's ever happened. But there's a high school coach here, locally, literally within 2 miles from the campus of MTSU, that coaches a powerhouse high school football program at Oakland High School in Kevin Creasy. It has been in some circles and rumors over the last year that he may get the call up because he could do it at such a low rate. I mean, coming from high school to work at Division I school, it is kind of unheard of, but it has happened a few times. It's never worked to success.
It has not went well when teams have won. I mean, we were just talking about Tony Sanchez. We know how that went at UNLV.
Right. And so
Yeah.
Bishop Gorman. I mean, obviously a powerhouse program.
Trent Dilfer did not do well at UAB doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's right back here at Nashville as well. But
I didn't know that. Okay.
yeah, he went
Okay.
from Lipscomb Academy in Nashville down to
Yep.
UAB, and now he's back at Lipscomb Academy. And so, but that name is circulated as a guy who could potentially do it at a discounted rate versus trying to hire someone that's in the D1 ranks. But the bigger storyline in the terms of, and I hate to change the question on you, but the bigger storyline here is the president of the university is retiring in December. Okay. They have to find a new president. Does that new president then hire a new athletic director? Yes. And then does that become this domino effect where if we have a bad football season, December is that perfect timeline for the new president, new athletic director to then find a new football coach. So this could be a lot that could be taking place after this year.
Talking about former coordinators, whatnot, would Bodie Reeder be in the mix, do you think? Or did that not end well?
I mean, it was all internal. I think fan base wise, we were a little bored with the offense. So I don't think that it would be welcomed by the fan base to even think to exercise. And also, again, to throw a wrench in it, he's at Western Kentucky now. So what does that look like from him taking a job at Western to then coming back to MTSU?
That's fair. But no, great answers there. We've reached the end of our time here, Jake, but I want to say fantastic episode. Loved having you on. And for all of our viewers out there, you'll see I'll tag Blue Raider Pod in all of our Twitter, YouTube, Spotify. You can find it anywhere. And thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Mike. Anytime. I appreciate you having me.